Hi everyone, Payman here, and today we have Lexi Hidalgo on the show. Lexi, thank you for being here.
Yes, of course. So happy to be here. What's going on?
Excited to have you. So, is your real name Lexi, or is that short for something?
Well, see, I could go into this for hours. My real name's actually Alexis. I've gone by Lexi since I was younger. The name Alexis always, I don't know, I just never liked it. It felt too mature, it felt too professional. But now, when I think of the name Alexis, I think of the most evolved version of myself, I guess you could say. So there's certain days I'm Alexis and certain days I'm Lexi, and I'm choosing to be Alexis today. So yeah, it's
Oh, I
short.
love
It's
that.
short for Alexis, but usually just Lexi. Always go by
Yeah,
Lexi.
yeah. It's funny. Yeah. So my name's Payman, which is actually a Persian name. So I was born in Italy. My parents are from Iran, and then I moved to LA when I was 6. I think for me, it was always like hard because I didn't really like my name growing up because it's really hard to say and spell and all this stuff. And as a kid, you just like really want to fit in. So I always think it's funny, and we always ask about names because, um, there's like a certain like experience you went through just like with your nickname or like with your full name. And I think for me, like now I love my name. I think it's unique, and also after you meet me, it's like I'm probably the only payment so it kind
Exactly.
of
And
sticks
it's
in
a
your head.
cool freaking name. I love it. But did you,
Yeah.
when you first moved here, did you go by something else or you were always
I
as
never did. Yeah, I never did. So, um, it's funny. I think I got lucky in a way because like there's not like a clear like nickname that
yeah,
would work
I wouldn't even
well.
know what to go with.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of people would change to like a pretty like generic name if they did change it. But I just like got through the harder part, and then I was like, now I have like all the benefits of like not having a very standard name. But yeah, one thing we always start with on the show. Is we have this mental health journal that we released last year. It's called the Madhappy Journal. There's like a bunch of prompts in there,
So awesome.
and yeah, and we always ask, and we got to send you one if you don't have one, but
Oh,
we
I would
always
love
ask, yeah, we always ask, one prompt from there. And for me, my question for you today is, you can answer it and then I'll answer, is
cool.
what's one thing that you're currently struggling with or trying to work on in your life? Could be small, could be big.
This is a good one. I was actually thinking about this today, and I would probably say right now something I'm struggling with and doing my best to work through is stepping out of my comfort zone. Like, I'm so comfortable doing a lot of crazy things. Like, if someone put a log over the Grand Canyon and told me to walk across it, I would do it in a heartbeat. I love living on the edge, but I hold myself back so much sometimes because I just get nervous and I let
Mm.
things take so much control over me. And I think, like, what if this happens? What if that happens? And I'm working through it. Like, I'm doing big things and I'm taking big steps. And even for me to just, I don't know, have a conversation with someone about mental health that's not just with me sitting in my room talking to my mic is really cool and really big step in the right direction. So working through it, but I've definitely been struggling with it lately.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. It's so funny because comfort zones in general are a funny topic because, like, what you just mentioned, which is like walking across a log on the Grand Canyon, like to you, that's actually still technically in your comfort zone, even though externally it could seem like it's not. And like, I found for myself, like, I started therapy like 2 years ago, and
Best thing
it's
ever.
pretty, yeah, it's pretty crazy just like how much I've been able, and I always talk about on the show about how much I've been able to like learn about myself in that time. And there's
Mm-hmm.
so many areas where I wasn't even talking about the thing because anytime I would, like, I would just like feel very like weird inside, and like obviously like that's like the feeling that you are getting out of your comfort zone. And now even for me, and I think I'm gonna copy yours just because it's really good. And I think like for me, in work, the company's gotten a lot bigger, and we have a 30-person team, we have a big office, we have all these like expectations and stuff. And I think there's parts of my job that like I still stick to my comfort zone in. So like sometimes I let, some things in the back of my head, like, oh, you should have this conversation now, you shouldn't let it linger. But I do because obviously it's easier to do that. And we're humans and we don't want to do that interaction at all times. And like, it takes a lot of energy out of you every time you have one of those or whatever. But I think I found, and it was funny because I had one this morning that I was just like, hey, like I should just do this now, like instead of 2 months from now and waste everyone's time. And you feel so much better after too. And I think you just train yourself to be like, oh, I can do these things, and I'm not gonna die or I'm not gonna like fail or whatever. So really good one.
It's one of those things where I've recently learned that stepping out of your comfort zone and starting to, I watched this TED talk called, I think it was called Dancing with Fear, but I watched that and it shifted like the way that I saw the comfort zone so much. And it kind of just taught me that once you step out of your comfort zone once, it gets easier and easier and every time. And it kind of just keeps motivating you and keeps inspiring you to do the next thing. But obviously that's easier said than done. I feel the same way with work and taking the next big steps for the Moments podcast for myself in general. I just kind of, I'm like, well, I can get to it later. You know, all we have is time. But sometimes it's worth just taking the leap, like taking the first step, and it never goes wrong 90% of the time.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it's like everything's like pretty reversible as well. So like even if it didn't go as you expected, it's like
Learn, you
you're
grow.
still fine. Yeah. I'm curious. So you're 21, right?
Yes.
So I feel like you've done a lot for 21. I mean, when I was 21, I was still in college and, you know, I hadn't done really anything. But I'm curious for you, one, like, where did you grow up? Kind of like paint the picture of your childhood. And then we could get into that a bit.
Cool. Honestly, I I am 21. I do feel like I've done a lot, but I also feel like, there's so much more to do and we have so much
Of course.
time. But when I grew up in Delray Beach, Florida. So South Florida, always in the ocean, always by the water, no mountains, none of that. Had an awesome, awesome childhood. Like I have two younger brothers. They're 16 and 18 right now. My parents are the freaking best. I went to school, was in the gifted program. Our whole neighborhood, we were just like best friends. My parents went to high school with our neighbors and they had kids the same age. So we would like go in the
Wow.
woods and play infection, play manhunt. And I think back to my childhood and I'm so grateful for everything about it, every detail. And elementary school was great. I felt awesome. Obviously when you're young, you're in elementary school, you don't really understand anything about what you're feeling mentally or why you're feeling things. And then middle school kind of happened for me. And that's when I felt the biggest shift in my life. And that's when I think I found my, I guess, for lack of a better word, that's when I found my purpose. And that's when I figured out what I was passionate about. I had been in sixth and seventh grade, just kind of dealing with this really, really strange feeling, like physically ill every single day. Couldn't get on the bus, would call my mom, make her pick me up from school. She was so fed up with like me being sick. And I just thought I was dying of this like internal disease. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know crap about mental health or anxiety or depression. And I finally figured out that that's what it was. I tried acupuncture, I tried going to the doctor, and it wasn't until I did yoga, literally for the first time, that I felt this whole shift in my mentality and the way that I saw the world. And I went from this place of darkness and like hatred, not only for myself, but for everything around me, to I consider it like looking back, I call it seeing colors and just seeing people in a different light and understanding that the world really is a beautiful place. And all that happened for me in one yoga class. So everything
Mhm.
shifted. I was 13, had this like wake up call to life, and I decided that I wanted to be a yoga teacher. So I told my mom, I'm like, Mom, I'm going to be a yoga teacher. She's like, What? You're literally 13 years old. I don't know what was going through my head as a 13-year-old, but apparently I had this mission and I had this goal. And I've said before, like, I think something came over me or someone came over and told me, Here you go. This is what you're going to do. So we called so many studios. They all said, like, no, she's too young. Why would you even think that we would allow her to do this? Like, yoga teaching is for adults and yada, yada, yada. The world sometimes just doesn't want to see people win. And I finally found a studio after who knows how many calls that wanted to take me into their training. So I got certified, became a certified yoga teacher when I was 13. At the time, it was the youngest certified yoga teacher in the country. And it was freaking awesome. I would teach classes. And the goal with all of that was to share with people my age that it's going to be okay. Because I knew I wasn't the only one feeling what I had been feeling. But back then, I guess I didn't understand what the mission was or what I was trying to share. And now I can look at it and understand that it's just important to know that you're going to feel things and you're going to go through things, but it's going to pass and it's okay. If that
Yeah,
makes sense. But I would say
it
that
does.
that's pretty much my childhood story.
It does. Yeah, it's funny because you talk about your childhood and from what it sounds like, it was amazing. And like there wasn't anything like externally happening at the time that like would have led to feeling anxious or feeling depressed necessarily. And I think like one that's like a big lesson in it of itself, which is like it's not only about like your external condition. It's just like things
Mhm.
happen and like you can't really like predict them. I'm curious, like thinking back about on that time, like is there something that you think led to you feeling that way, or do you really think it was just like chance or genetics or really whatever it was?
Honestly, I can kind of pinpoint where it really started and like what happened, but I think it's part of being at that age and in the generation where technology is just becoming more and more powerful. And I had been in middle school, and I don't know what year it was, but maybe like 2011, 12, they had that app called like Ask FM where people could
Mm,
anonymously just like say
yeah.
things about you and comment things. And it was what
Yeah.
everyone was doing. And my mom would yell at me every time she found out I had like an Ask FM.
Yeah.
And I did it anyways. Who cares? I'm not going to listen to my mom. Why would I do that? And people would just say some horrible things. I dealt with mean girls. I dealt with people literally sending me pictures of like dead animals and being like, this is what you look like. And it was hard. I mean, obviously looking back, I can kind of laugh and be like,
Yeah.
it's okay. Like nothing's personal. You don't have to take things like that to the heart. But at the time, I just believed everything everyone told me. And I felt
Totally.
like I had been hearing so much negative that I just began to perceive myself as this terrible human being, this ugly human being who wasn't capable of much at all. And then obviously, when you feel that hurt, when I felt that pain, I just kind of put that same energy back into the world. Not to say I was like a mean person at all. I've always
Mm.
considered myself to have a good heart, but like I didn't view potential positivity.
Mm.
I
Yeah,
just kind of
your
I sold
outlook was just
it.
different.
And then in yoga, the first thing they said was just like take a moment to be here, to be now, and to be grateful for everything that's going on. And I was like, oh, maybe if I try that, like maybe I'll feel a little bit better. And it's just kind of like snowballed into the idea that yeah, you just have to focus on gratitude. But
Yeah.
going back to where this part even started, it was Ask FM, it was middle school, it was Mean
Yeah,
Girl, it was something that a lot of us have struggled with,
for
just
sure. For
sometimes.
sure. I mean, I think, yeah, I remember. I mean, it was like I was like a junior, senior in high school when that happened.
Yeah.
So a little bit older, but yeah, I mean, I feel like it's almost impossible, especially the younger you are, to not take that to heart.
Because
And we
you
talk on the show, but
can't know.
yeah, yeah, we talk on the show about how like when you're younger, it's like all you want to do is fit in. And so like anytime like you feel like you're an outcast, or you don't look like everyone else, or you don't feel like everyone else, then like it's so much harder for you to take that on. And then hopefully as you get older, you're like, oh, like I'm unique, and like that's actually what's cool about me. But it takes a while to get there. So that makes sense. So you're feeling these things, you started doing yoga, and like that was kind of like your path to being like, oh, like what they're saying doesn't matter. It's like I have everything I want. I have a great family, all this stuff. So then how did you go from that to like actually starting to share some of those things um externally, like whether it was through TikTok, YouTube, and eventually the podcast? Like how did that all come to be?
So, one thing that I've noticed about myself is that the passion for sharing that has kind of just stayed consistent because back when it was yoga, it was while I would teach yoga classes. I would talk on all of these things. And back in the day, I actually made like a yoga Instagram that I wanted to be Instagram famous or something, just posting yoga flows and yoga videos and yoga pictures and like little words of inspiration. And it's so crazy to think that that was back in 2012, 13, 14. And now it's 2022 and I'm here still doing this in a way. But
Yeah.
I kind of took a break from yoga. I got into beauty pageants and I did that for about a year, making it basically just my mission to help people understand the same thing that you got to love yourself through everything that you go through and just helping people understand their value and their worth. And then stepped away from that, went to college for a couple years, spent a year of college not really focusing on any of my passions or my projects. I just kind of partied and did the whole shebang. I felt myself falling back into that depressive era, I guess I could say. And I pulled myself out of the college I was going to, moved home. Quarantine happened, and I'm so grateful for it because that's when I started posting on TikTok, just literally posting workout videos, what I eat in a day, videos with my family, day in the lives. And I started to notice that it gained traction, and it was gaining traction for good reasons. I was somehow, some way inspiring people to take care of their body, to move their body, to love themselves through it all. And then it just kind of has kept going and kept flowing. And now it's kind of the one thing that's the most important to me is just talking about mental health. Obviously, still doing all the things that are fun, like day in the lives and fun
Yeah.
little vlogs, but most importantly, just helping people understand that it's all gonna be okay, and it can be that simple. But
Yeah.
it's been a cool journey. And then,
Totally.
what about you guys? Like, how did this all happen?
Yeah. Well, really quick on that. I mean, I think it's amazing. I feel like there was a shift, over the past couple years of like before, especially when I was like growing up, like high school, college, like that content wasn't really out there as much. Like everything was very just like, IG, like very like
Definitely.
filtered photos, like nothing raw, like no emotion type of thing. Um, and the change of that I think has been very powerful, especially because like now there's so many places like TikTok, YouTube, all these things where like if it went that same direction it would be even worse. And
Yeah.
so that's amazing, and congrats. For us, it started really just like as a small project. Like Mason, who's my co-founder, and my brother Noah had started a clothing brand together in high school because they loved making clothes, and it's pretty easy to go to downtown and just like figure out how to make some things. And they learned a lot through that, and that was a good like first experience. I wasn't mad happy, and Mason was like actually my first friend that struggled with his mental health, and that was like actually how I learned what mental health was. Like he never knew his biological dad growing up. He was in therapy since he was like 3 or 4 because he dealt with a lot of things. Moved from Colorado to Michigan to LA, and I think he really struggled. Just he went to college for a year. We're the same age. Dropped out of college, and really was trying to find his path. Felt like sort of in a low moment, and thought of this name, Mad Happy, in a text to someone. And yeah, and he texted it to someone sort of in like a different context, like I'm mad happy for you, and really started to think about that word. Shared it with my brother. Shared it with me, and the idea behind the word is like you can be optimistic despite the challenges that come in our lives. And
Absolutely.
so, for us, we were like, oh, like we think this name's amazing and there's like a big message here. And like, why not put it on a couple, products and like
Yeah.
see what people think? Not this whole like big thing. And I think early on it was like, wow, like one, people love the name and the vibe and stuff. And the idea was like, how do you make a space that's been so like dark, negative, closed off, like streetwear, kind of like don't walk in the store, like fuck you, whatever, more like approachable, fun, and like for everyone, because also like most of the brands have been like just for guys, for example, right?
Mhm.
Or like very small percentage of like unisex customer. And like people really liked it. And I think early on we were doing these like little pop-ups, and we did this like panel on mental health because we were talking about optimism and stuff like that. And everyone from there was like, wow, like we were like, no brand has ever done this, no one's talking about mental health. This was like 2017, like it wasn't like the popular thing in the news yet. And we were like, just like what Nike did with physical health and getting people moving, that like helped change a generation. Like maybe there will be a brand that does that for mental health, and oh, maybe that could be us. And so that was like the little thing at the beginning and the spark and stuff. And then from there, we just kept going and just trying our best, and believing in what we were doing. And we've been very fortunate that like people were very receptive to the message, and I think everyone knows someone that's experienced challenges with their mental health, and everyone themselves has probably dealt with things throughout their life, whether they realize it or not. And I think it allowed us to have something that's like so uniquely like human and universal, to be like the core message of the brand. And I think when those things hit and the name really matches like the mission and like the vibe of what we're going for, I think like gave us a good chance to start, and hopefully we could keep it going.
Definitely. It's so inspiring just to like hear everything and hear other people's stories. It's one of my favorite things is listening to other people talk about what they're passionate about. But it's just so cool to see how it started with an idea. It started with something small, literally a text message with the word in it. And that's kind of how it starts for everyone when it comes to chasing dreams and chasing passion. So I'm so proud of you guys. I mean, I just met you, but seriously, it's
Yeah,
so awesome to hear. And I
yeah.
love
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm curious, like for you, in starting the podcast, I think that podcast format of also just like talking into a mic, solo for like the audience to hear, is probably like the most personal podcasting medium, because like you're literally talking into people's
it.
ears, and like they form this like real relationship with you. Like I found that with listening to, Emma Chamberlain's podcast, and these different ones. I'm like, wow, like you really feel like you get to know someone, which I think is an amazing venue. And like podcast I think is uniquely suited for that. What was like the kind of inspo for you to start that? Was it like the message that you wanted to get out, and like if it could help people, then like why not share it?
Well, honestly, I I never really grew up listening to podcasts. I never watched YouTube. I which is strange because I feel like everyone that I know, even all my best friends, had like their favorite YouTubers. And turns out I guess I never watched YouTube, never listened to podcasts, obviously probably scrolled through Instagram. But at the time on TikTok, I was posting these 1 minute videos making coffee, and I called them little coffee talks. And in those videos, I would just kind of go over what was heavy on my heart, what was heavy on my mind, what did I want to talk about, and then kind of take what I was feeling and in a way shift it into something that someone could shift it into something that people could take away from it in a way. Like if I was
Mm.
feeling like just really insecure, I would do a video talking about why you need to love yourself and why it's important. And I was kind of giving my followers, I guess you could say, advice that I needed to hear. And a bunch of people would comment like, you should start, and this was in 2020, you should start a podcast, you should do a podcast. I didn't know crap about this platform because I've never really listened or dove into it. And then one day I was kind of sitting and just thinking, podcast would be really cool. It would be a really cool outlet to just kind of talk about these things on such a bigger scale and just reach more people in a, like you said, more personal way. And I just kind of went for it. I waited for a little while. I was like waiting for everything to be perfect, waiting to be able to do it the right way. And then it hit me that it's never going to be perfect. You kind of just have to
Yeah.
take the first step. You have to go for it. And ultimately, I just started the podcast to become best friends with everyone who is watching me on TikTok because it is so personal. And when I record that podcast, I sit in like literally in this room in my house. When I first started it, I was sitting in my car, and then I was sitting in the van that I bought that broke down. So like I've never had a official studio area. So whenever
Yeah.
I'm doing it, I'm by myself, and it's kind of like I'm just sitting there talking with myself through what it is that I'm going through and what I'm feeling. And then it's super cool because I know I'm not the only one feeling it. And it's just really fulfilling knowing that it's been able to reach people in a way bigger than I ever could have imagined. And just
Yeah.
hearing messages of people being like, wait, I didn't know I didn't know other people felt that too, or like I didn't know that this is something I could do to feel better. It's just been the coolest little journey, and it's
That's
still a
awesome.
learning lesson every single day. I'm still recording with my sometimes voice memos on my phone. I don't have professional mics. I like only have my best friends come on as guests usually, but it's a step in the right direction, and it's been awesome. Like I love this podcast more than anything.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I love that neon sign. So it's really dope.
Yeah,
And
it's pretty awesome.
how, how does it feel like for you? I mean, sharing that stuff, and like even when you started, you're like, oh, like I don't know how many people are gonna listen, but like whatever, let's just see. And then like seeing like and hearing messages or TikToks about like people feeling like they got so much from it, or like their life was saved by like hearing something that you said. Like, how does that make you feel? And like sort of like what responsibility now do you think you have in the content you're making and in what you're doing for your life?
Totally, totally. I kind of have always done this thing where when I first started talking about mental health on TikTok, I think is where it started. I mean, it started back like when I was teaching yoga classes, but that's in a small scale. That's with like 10 to 15 people, and it feels super personal, and I'm not worried about judgment or anything like that. But bringing that to TikTok, bringing that to the internet that can be such a cruel place sometimes, it was scary. So I just had to convince myself that no one was watching. Like I honestly didn't have a problem with random people hearing what I was struggling with. I had a problem with people from high school hearing what I was struggling with or going through, or like my parents. And
Mm.
it still gives me this anxiety. And I like don't really like to think about the people close to me in my life listening to me being vulnerable. But I also have learned that being vulnerable is the most powerful thing. One TED talk I watched that like totally shifted everything for me was Brene Brown's The
Yeah.
Power of Vulnerability. And I have her book. I haven't started it, but I want to. It's taught me that it's literally okay to feel all of these things. And then I just kind of kept doing it. And I started getting really, really valuable messages of people, like I said, just saying, it's so comforting to know that I'm not the only one that's going through this, or it's inspiring to see you working through what you're feeling. But every once in a while, you'd get, it's so stupid. No one cares. Like, why do you talk about this stuff? And we know what DMs can look like. People will say
Yeah.
anything when they're just hiding behind a screen. But I've learned to kind of have sympathy for those people and just understand that some people can just be bitter because they're hurting on their own. Like that was me in middle school, and something that I faced, and it's something that everyone's going to work through when they're ready to work through it. But it's just been inspiring to see the reaction and see the response, and I'm sure it's very similar for you guys. It's motivating to keep doing what you're doing and to keep helping more people and reaching more people, and not just to reach more people but to help people understand that it's all good, you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think yeah, it's interesting. Like for me, I found, of course, it's like always harder to talk to like the people closest to, and it's actually a lot
Hmm.
easier to do it on a podcast. And then if they listen, then that's how they could hear about it too. But it's almost funnier. Like people that come on the show, they're like, yeah, like I can say a lot of stuff on here that like I haven't said to like my closest friends or my family or like my significant other. And I think it's just a funny thing about like vulnerability of just like it's so hard to do with the people closest to, and it's like this like weird thing. um I'm curious now, like thinking about the future, and like I know you do a lot of writing, and like how are you thinking about like the different things you do? Is the goal all really around this purpose of like talking about mental health, spreading the positivity in different mediums and channels and that sort of thing?
I would say the goal is always going to stay the same. The passion is always going to be to just help people feel understood and help people feel capable of accomplishing their dreams. And I consider myself to have this squirrel brain. So I have like dreams and ideas, and like the list goes on and on and on. And I struggle with really bad ADHD. So like I start things, I don't finish them. I can't focus half the time. But at the same time, that it's something I struggle with so deeply, it's also my superpower. And I think that that's where all my creative ideas come from. So I'm grateful for it more than anything. But right now, I'm kind of super tuned in on writing because when I write, I've learned that I discover all these feelings that I've been holding in my subconscious mind, whether
Mm,
like I just haven't been able to understand them or feel them or talk about them. When I write, all these things come out on paper, and I'm like, holy crap, Lexi, like that's kind of deep. You should probably work through that, you know?
yeah,
And it's just been such a powerful outlet for me. And I want to eventually like have a journal, create a guided journal, because I know it can help so many people understand those
for
feelings and those
sure.
emotions. Because as humans, we're kind of like, since we've been little, been conditioned to just, feel better, do better. It's what the older generation teaches us because
Yeah,
they didn't know anything about mental health. They just said, get over it, like you're being too sensitive. But I think that when we can understand ourselves at such a young age and figure out why we feel what we feel, I do think it's going to help this generation because we won't face these crises when we're older, I guess. I don't know. It's just cool to be able to understand your emotions, have awareness of your problems, learn how to work through them while we're still young. And I think that journaling
totally.
has just been the coolest way to do so for me lately. And I think that everyone should do it more.
Totally. Yeah. I always talk about that. Like, I feel like I could do it more. And I talk about it in therapy, and I forget sometimes, but every time I do it, it does help me a lot. But yeah, so knowing that, we definitely got to send you some journals.
Yeah, and
But
it's totally okay to forget. Like there's times where I'll notice in my life I will be journaling multiple times a day, just having like random ideas come through my head. I'm like, you know what, I should write about that. And then there's other phases of my life where I won't touch it for weeks, sometimes months, and I'll go back to it and be like, you know what, maybe I needed that break from understanding myself so well. I don't know how to explain it, but it's normal to be a phase and in
for
and out
sure.
of it, but it's still super powerful. And I know you just said that you started therapy recently. So did I, but I freaking love therapy. Could talk about it all day. How would you say, like, one word to describe your experience with it so far? What would it be?
Very eye opening, I would say, for me. I think like I've always been someone who like I thought like I understood like myself or like
Mhm.
what was going on or like the awareness piece. And I think like the best part about therapy is actually like seeing like, oh, you actually have not considered all of these things, and kind of try to show, you're a good therapist will try to show you like the things in your life that like you're ignoring or trying
Mhm.
to not accept as true. But only if you accept those things as true can you really like grow as a person and move on
It's
and
what it feels
actually
like. You got to admit you have a problem to start
yeah.
fixing it. Therapy is similar to that.
And it's not even like that everything's a problem, but it's like thinking about how different experiences in your life could shape, how
Hmm.
you do things, certain behaviors, certain ways of thinking things today about today, where like you kind of repress those memories, or like you're like, oh, that didn't have an effect on me. Like for me, like obviously like moving to the US, not speaking English, feeling like left out, like all that stuff obviously has an impact on who I am today, whether I admit that or not, or think about that or not. And so I think in that way it's been really helpful. What about you?
I started going to therapy. I was one of those people in high school where if you told me how to go to therapy, I would have thought I was weak. Like I considered me in high school to be a lot more closed minded than I am now. Like I
For
was
sure.
just, I believed in stereotypes, all that stuff. I thought therapy was for weak people, people who had problems, yada, yada, yada. And then I went to college, started feeling these things again, and started to actually open my mind to therapy. My roommate was in therapy. She loved it. I was like, maybe I should go. Avoided it for a couple years. And then I finally was like having a really hard time with my focus. Like my work was evolving in a way that I couldn't keep up with. And since, and I guess I would say I'm self employed, I have to discipline myself. I have to
Mm,
time manage, and that is something that I really struggled with my inability to focus. But I also didn't want to look into medication or anything like that because it was also my superpower. One of those things
yeah,
where I was just facing this conflict and I was like, you know what, I think now's the time for me to talk to someone about it, because I would
totally.
love to talk to someone who actually understands it and can give me an unbiased opinion on what they think. And went to therapy for the first time. It was another one of those situations like that first yoga class was for me. I'm like, oh, this is freaking awesome. Like this is life changing. It's mind opening, and it's just been a really cool journey to be able to go and talk to someone, unbiased opinion again, about what's going on in my life, what I'm feeling, and be able to learn from them and be able to just feel a little bit better each and every time. And now I kind of look at therapy as, like the class that you enjoy going to. Like I think back to high school, you always get excited for like fifth hour. And that's kind of what therapy is for me. Like every time I have time in my week to schedule an appointment, I'm like, oh, let's go. Like I'm so pumped. And it's crazy. It can still have such a negative stigma to so many people, but it is really
Yeah.
freaking awesome and it's powerful. And you don't have to be hurting or struggling to go to therapy. That's another huge thing that I learned. Like I thought I had to be sad or I had to be having a depressive episode to go, but like no, I still go to therapy when I'm at my highest of highs, like when I'm happy. Just
Totally.
because I'm going to learn something and about myself, and just talking to people is awesome.
For sure. Yeah. And I think one other thing with therapy for me has been like um just like that time. It's hard to make that time for yourself, like you said you do
Mhm.
with journaling and stuff. And I think just pulling yourself out of like your day to day, even just like that hour is very helpful, even without like the therapy portion part of it. I'm curious for you, you put out a good amount of content. Like, do you feel like, what sorts of like pressures do you feel, I guess, in that, like, you have this responsibility, you feel like you want to keep doing what you're doing, but also at times I'm sure that feels like, damn, like I want to just like skip this week, like, how do you deal with that piece of it?
That's a huge one for me. And I think that that's one that I am constantly going to be learning how to figure out and how to work through. I have a really hard time balancing work and life because, in a way, my life is my work and my
Hmm.
work is my life at the same time. So I
Exactly.
love being able to constantly put out content, whether it's making TikToks, taking pictures. Like photography is another thing that I love so much, which is super cool to be doing what it is that I'm doing right now. But it's almost like I sometimes forget how to just be there for myself. And even
Yeah,
now, since I talk about mental health, since I talk about vulnerability, I almost talk about everything that I'm going through so consistently that I'm taking away from it actually being my self care time. I don't
yeah,
know how to make that make sense, but almost everything that I do now, I've started putting out. And I think that that's super awesome. And honestly, I'm really grateful for it. But I have been trying to take time to write things that I'm not going to share with the internet, or write things that are just so personal to me and they can stay personal, because when I do that, it does help me separate work and
for
life
sure.
a little bit more. But it also does feel like a responsibility, but a great one. Like
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think like when the mesh is so clear, then like it's hard to like know like
Mhm.
fully like, is this me or is this me because it's going out or whatever, and those things, and like it could stop you from like doing certain things or sharing certain things or writing certain things because you're going to share it.
Yes, I noticed that in my journal. Like I'll be writing a really good, whether it's like a poem or just a piece, I'll be writing it. I'm like, oh, this would be really cool to post like on my, I don't know, whether it's read it on my TikTok or put it on an
Yeah,
Instagram story. But then I'll avoid writing certain things in it because I'm like, well, I can't tell people that.
yeah,
And because obviously some things are still going to be too personal to put on the internet. You can't put every
totally.
second of your life online. But
Totally.
it's definitely a challenge sometimes. But again, there's always going to be challenges. Just got to work through
Yeah.
them one day at a time.
Two questions we ask everyone is one is like, who's one person that like you would nominate to come on the show that like you've heard their story, whether you know them or not, and it's been like really inspirational to you in your journey?
Dang, see this one's hard because there's so many people that I look up to and have taught me different things. And that's one of the most valuable lessons I've learned in life is that everyone can teach you something and everyone
For
can
sure.
inspire you. I recently discovered that one. I don't know why it just clicked, but I, one person I watched I think it was a video podcast of him and like maybe it was like Logan Paul. I don't know who it was, but Charlie Rocket. He has like this dream
Oh, yeah.
machine. I
Charlie.
watched this maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and just the way that he talked and the way that he believed in himself. And now what he's doing is even cooler. He's just helping people every single day. I think that's freaking awesome. But he has inspired me to just keep going and keep chasing my dreams. And then obviously, there's my mom, there's my best friends. They're two people who have just believed in me along every step of the way. And I mean, I'm just forever grateful for them. But I don't know, it's a hard one
Yeah. No,
because
that's a
there's
good
so
one.
many people,
Yeah, so
so
many.
many people.
Charlie, we've kind of gotten to know each other on Instagram recently, and watching what they're doing, super awesome. So, so definitely a great one. And then the final question we ask everyone is, Lexi, what makes you mad happy?
What makes me mad happy? Dang, so many things. Food. I love food. I feel like that's a simple one, but also being in nature. Like I love to go on road trips. So whenever I go on a road trip, I make sure I go to a national park, and I'm
I
obsessed
love
with national parks because you'll go on this hike and you'll be on this mountain and it's just this massive mountain. You usually have no service. You kind of just sit there and you're like, oh wow, I'm really just like an ant living on this rock that's floating in this galaxy that's in the universe.
that.
However, the statistics of it work, it kind of just puts into perspective for me that some of the things that are weighing on me so heavy don't need to be weighing on me so heavy. I can just kind of let them go. Like I'm just here to experience this human experience every step of the way. And I don't know. I think that is when I feel the most mad happy and the most at
I love that.
peace with
Yeah, I
life. But
love that.
I want to know your mad happy moment.
Wow, good one. A lot of people flip it on me, so I have to have a different answer every time. I think for me, um, earlier this year, I was just like, so right before we started the brand, I was going through like a really hard time because I had gotten sick and I had left New York, and then it had like led to this like amazing moment of starting Mad Happy, and like during it, I wouldn't have known that. And then for the last 5 or 6 years, like I'd been feeling like great overall, like of course like ups and downs, but then this year, over the past like maybe like June through September, it was just like a really hard time for me. I think like a lot of like the last 5 years caught up to me, um and just was dealing with some like really challenging things and like feeling more down than I have in 5 plus years. And it was really hard for me because externally, like the brand was going well and all this sort of stuff, but I just like wasn't feeling good. And I think I realized, yeah, whenever I am in those moments, I feel so much more grateful for like all like the little things, like my parents or my girlfriend or my friends or my brother or my partners in this company, and everything I have. And I think I am generally like a grateful person, and I never like need too many things, all of that stuff. But it's so funny how like people say like when you're sick, like all you want to like not be is sick, and then when you're not sick, you want so many things. But like the same thing of like when you're feeling depressed or down, like you're like so happy with just like the basic things of just like, oh, like I have friends and they're amazing, or I have a girlfriend and she's amazing, or all these things. And so going through that time and then now feeling like I'm coming out of it and feeling a lot better, like it's it's like hanging on to those things, and like that's really what life's about, and that's what makes me that happy.
That's freaking awesome. No, it's scary when like you feel like you've been at this really good point for a while and then it kind of catches
For
up to
sure.
you all at once and you just feel this like
Yeah.
heaviness and this overwhelm and this stress and things that usually like wouldn't bother you at all just like I get super irritable when I'm going through it. Like when I'm in a
Yeah,
funk, everything just makes me angry in a way, but I think it's
totally.
just my deep rooted sadness just comes out as anger. But it's so cool that it's just this cycle. You have to have the lows to have
Totally.
the highs, and one wouldn't exist without the other. And it's cool. It's a really cool thing.
That's what Mad Happy is all about.
Exactly.
But Lexi,
I love it.
thank you so much for coming on. Obviously, like I'm very inspired by what you're doing. So please keep it up.
And
Would love
right
to
back
do
at you.
this. Yeah, would love to do this on your podcast if it, if you'll have us. But um, either way, keep doing what you're doing. Would love to have you come by the office next time you're in LA, and
Absolutely.
just keep it all up. But thank you so much.
Yeah. And thank you so much for having me. We'll definitely do this again soon.
All right, talk soon, everyone.
See
Bye.
ya.